That should be absolutely fun.
I know. I mean, that's a wonder of nature. The other place, okay, let me see here. तुमको दिख नहीं रहा है ऊपर ऊपर जाएगा तो I've been to Azerbaijan.
Sir, I know that story.
Even I know. Salman Khan's movie, no?
सलमान खान ने कौन सा
मूवी बनाया था अजरबैजान एकता टाइगर में part 2.
Is it?
Yeah, I think it's about Azerbaijan only. There
Oh,
was
I
some
don't-
terror attack and all those things.
Prabal, this was about Formula One racing.
नहीं, so she wanted to, but I'd been to Bahrain in the Formula One
Oh,
many years ago as a guest of the Economic Development Board of Bahrain. So that time, I mean, I don't understand the game at all. Yeah, I mean, the sport, logo, all the Srishti understands. क्या है रे? Srishti जरा बताओ रे, what is Formula One about?
So, sir, it's a normal car racing thing only, but you have many things in that, sir. So, even the car built, they have something called DRS. They have the tires are different for that. If you want to go speed, you will have a colored hard tire, medium tire, soft tire. So each tire level, you will have the speed levels as well. So that is one thing. And if at all, I mean, crashes happen, right? In general, accidents happen even in that. So if accident happen and if yellow flags are raised, you shouldn't speed. If yellow flags are raised, you shouldn't speed and you shouldn't overtake the car ahead of you. So whichever position you are in, you should go in that position only and you should be very slow until the safety car is out of the track.
Okay.
These are like very few small things, but deeper, there are many more things in that, sir.
I couldn't understand anything. So we were in Bahrain in that very executive hospitality lounge of Economic Development Board, and my whole attention was who's come from Batelco, who's come from Zain, who's come from Microsoft, who's come from Cisco, and all that. Rather than focusing on the race, which I have no clue about, and finally I saw it only on the television. And then I used to ask someone, so who's winning and all that, right? So I had no clue.
So this is what happens. So my dad and me, we sit together. He has no clue on that. Though my dad is an athlete, he has no clue on what that is. So every time one car passes, he'll be like, who is that car? Who is this yellow car, white car? So I have to explain him with the player's name and the number of their car and all that.
Yeah. And then, it passes by where you are sitting in like 2 seconds, isn't it? So
exactly.
Then you don't know. So I don't know why people pay money and sit in the stands in the heat. You can't understand. But
you get to see the drivers after that, no? Racers, you can see them after that, no? Then.
Perhaps, I don't know. I didn't. Well, you saw those pictures I sent you.
Yes, sir, yes.
Yeah.
You were extremely lucky. I was like so jealous.
A lot of people said that. It seems, my nephew, he's now in Qatar.
Okay.
So he says that people go into the track and kneel down and kiss the tracks and all that.
Sure, exactly.
And I said, I went to the tracks. I said, what? You went? Oh my God. We want to do and all that.
And, I was more jealous because you have a picture in Lewis Hamilton's stand. Like the shed, no? So I was more jealous. A big fan of him. And I'm like, wow. With ease, you're standing next there.
Yeah, I know. And then there was this exhibition of all those antique cars. I sent you all of those pictures.
Yes, sir. Yes.
With the history and all that. So I just kind of took pictures for my nephew, with whom I shared. So he goes. He's been to Singapore. He's been to, I don't know, Monaco, whether he's been, I don't know. Some other place he's been to.
For the race?
For the race, yes.
Oh, wow. That's awesome, sir.
Yeah, I know.
Please take money for that, for going to the races. Yeah, Srishti.
I wish, seriously, I wanted to go to Vietnam. There's a new track in Vietnam, so I was thinking, somehow this year I should manage to go there.
Is there a track in Australia?
Yes, so Australia is the first race that starts every year. So March, it starts March 15. This year also it was scheduled. But in one of the Formula team, someone got COVID. So the race was cancelled.
Oh, you may want to first go to Australia for the tracks, no?
Sir, just a minute. I'll just check with Navdeep so once.
Okay.
So now you're able to see the PPT more clearly?
Now I'm able to see nothing.
Who is it?
We were privileged. Sharing has gone wrong on your side.
Now?
We're back. You're back.
Okay, so it's not like Teams. If we switch from one screen, the same screen will be visible. Here, if we switch, the screen will go.
You know, the other thing that you see here on this map at the top about Tehran is this lake, right? I think it's the Black Sea. I'm not sure. This Black Sea is, underneath that is full of oil, absolutely full of oil. So all countries surrounding this are desperately pumping out the oil and for their economy. So Turkmenistan is pumping out, Azerbaijan is pumping out, Uzbekistan is pumping out, right? That is what is happening there. I mean, so when you go and see that, if you go to those beaches there, the whole thing will be slicky, oily, black, and then you realize how man is so selfish, right? He's just screwing up the economy and the environment for the sake of the economy.
So he's joining. I just spoke to him. He's joining.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's the sense you got there. When you went there, the beaches are all black, oily. It's so.
Where is it, sir?
In
Which
Azerbaijan.
place?
Azerbaijan.
Okay.
So Azerbaijan is abutting this, this sea here above Tehran called, I think it's the Black Sea or the Caspian Sea. I'm not sure, one of them. And it is, all the countries around it are all very busy pumping out the oil. Hey, Navdeep, Suri, sir, you've joined. Or maybe he's not.
He's on mute. He's on mute. So you're on mute.
Yeah.
Yes.
Founder?
Prabal, you can start sharing.
Yeah.
Just one.
We can hear you.
Let me just make sure that my.
Yeah.
Hey, Smita, it's not convenient now. In 7 and 8, I daily do a show, that same show. Not a good time to talk. I'm busy now. 7 to 8, I do the show. Now I'll call you back. Yeah, bye.
Hello.
Hi, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi.
Krishna.
Hi there. Amritsar,
Okay.
how's Amritsar?
Well, we got some rain today, so it was nice for a few hours, but otherwise it's been fairly hot and muggy.
Oh.
Yeah. But it's nice. My friends say it's better to be in Amritsar than in Delhi, considering how the virus has been spreading there. So maybe there's some merit to being in a small town.
I know. For me, of course, Amritsar, besides the fact that, the roadside eats and all is good, etc. For me, it's a very peculiar thing about Amritsar is I am in touch with this guy called Lubhaya Ram.
Oh,
yes.
Aam Papad.
Yes, and I get from him. He ships it to me here.
Under the people tree.
Yes. And I introduced him to CP Gurnani. And CP
Right.
Gurnani actually came very close to setting up a stall by him in his daughter's wedding.
In Abu Dhabi.
No, daughter. Son was in Abu Dhabi.
Son was in Abu Dhabi, that's right.
Daughter was in this place. He came very close, this close to that. And then, pata nahi kuch ho gaya, he didn't do it.
Yeah, he's kind of a legend. For years when we were overseas, we used to take his Aam Papads for friends and so on.
Absolutely.
And now at least he has a store. But for many years, it really was a cart under that people tree in front of very strategically placed in front of the women's college.
Oh, I know. So, yeah. That's how I know.
So you're expecting a lot of people?
Yeah. CP has also sent out a mail, and he has access to certain mailing lists that we don't have an access to.
All right.
He can, for example, send it to all at Techem, which he has, and I can't send it on that.
Of course. Yeah. I had just forgotten in this COVID thing that I had signed up with these TOSB guys.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and they were kind of a little mess. No, you should be using us to don't talk directly to people.
Oh yeah. Okay. So what do you have signed up as in, so they manage all
So
this?
what they do is they're pretty selective, but they have a panel of speakers that they keep for different events. So when it's a corporate event, when it's a conference, when something, they are in touch, or they are approached by the organizers that we've got this event and we want this. So they are a part of Genesis PR.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's a multinational, so they're part of Genesis, and so when they are approached by an entity saying, so they approached me when I retired, saying, "Look, we've heard about you, and we want to sign you up with us. And if you get any request for speaking, please let us work out the terms with the organizations. And similarly, if we are approached by organizations, then you are with us and we will propose your name to speak at those events." That kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Amazing. Oh, and so I think thanks to
that's when you start living by your wits, right?
I know. Hello. I know.
That's when you start living by your wits.
I know. So yeah, that's very, very good. Very, very good.
So you're predominantly sales and marketing?
Yeah. So I have moved into a new role. I was doing something else about 3 months ago, but now moved into a new role, which I have kind of called it on my own as sales enablement. So whatever this
Okay,
event
sales and
is doing is, kind of happened. It is not part of the JD, so to speak, but it is also in a way, isn't it? Because we are creating a bank of content which we can use not only across the salespeople, but I have a sales enablement role, which is essentially 60% of it is training, but there is also an element of coaching, mentoring, and all that, which we have not kicked in yet, but we will, because it also is a difficult time. So doing everything virtually has its limitations.
It does indeed, and I've been so used to speaking to large audiences in that ambassador's role, um, that initially the notion that you are speaking to just a camera
Correct.
takes a bit of getting used to. And for me, it's an extra order of magnitude because here in Amritsar, I don't have my computer. I do it off my iPad.
Oh,
And when you place the iPad in the landscape mode, the camera is on your left.
yes. Yeah. It's a big thing that I also face a problem on.
So you
I move around a few times to get to know whether your bearings,
Yeah. So if right now it's good that you are positioned on the left of the screen for me, but if you are on the right, then I'm actually looking here, which
I
is a
know.
bit weird.
I was looking up the website of your institution, ORF, and I was very impressed with the content there and the kind of current stuff
Yeah,
that is there. Is there
it is.
7th of July, 10th of July? I'm so
Very
impressed.
active.
So impressed. It is what? It's a government agency, or what is it?
At all. It's an independent think tank. It was originally set up with some support from Mukesh Ambani.
Okay.
But then over the years, they've diversified. They get support from a lot of different corporates, international agencies, etc. So we've got a team of almost 120 research scholars. There's an office in Mumbai, there's an office in Kolkata, the headquarters are in Delhi. There's now an office in Washington, D.C. So it's India's largest think tank by quite a margin. And, it does policy, it does advocacy on policy, it does analysis of policy across a lot of different disciplines.
Wow. So I just went to the site. My wife is an academic. So I mentioned the name of your institute. You said Center for something, right? You said
That's new, the Center for New Economic Diplomacy. Yeah, that was set up about a year back. So, they've been in touch with me from the time that I retired, and they wanted me to come and take over as director of the center, but also have this role of, bringing out new ideas into the policy domain. So I'm enjoying that.
amazing. So I went and
keeps
did
me.
some research, yeah, and then I found that, oh my God, it's so. And I was expecting, usually the government kind of thing will be little slow off the block and all that. It's
Not at all.
so current.
Not at all. It is very current, and it's very dynamic, and it's been very quick to go digital. I think many of the IT companies would be impressed with the speed and with which we've gone digital, and the sheer number of webinars and interviews and all of that stuff that we've been doing.
Yeah, okay.
You're based where?
I am based in Mumbai.
Right.
Mumbai. Yeah, today has been a rainy day all through, pouring rain. And but there is this Twitterati that I follow called Mumbai Weatherman. He's he's much better than your our
Official.
official one. So he's saying finally it is starting to rain near the catchment areas.
Okay.
So yeah, which is what is important, right? For Bombay, our tanks have to be full by end of September.
For the next year.
End of September, if tanks are full, we are kind of sorted. So
Okay.
let's.
Right.
So IFS, where were all you as an IFS person?
So I started off in Cairo. I started by learning Arabic, which I read, write, and speak.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I moved to Damascus, and I also did some French. Then I came back to Delhi, and then Washington DC, and then Dar es Salaam, and then London, and then back to Delhi as head of our Africa desk, and then to Johannesburg as consul general, and then back to Delhi as head of our public diplomacy, then ambassador to Egypt, then then high commissioner in Australia, and then ambassador in UAE.
And so what do children do in all of this?
Get lost. No, so we have two daughters. One, when she was growing up, she was doing her IB. We were in Joburg.
Okay.
So she stayed in South Africa to do her undergrad and postgrad. Now she's doing her PhD in environment or ecology, urban ecology.
Okay.
At University of Cape Town. The older one is after having traveled around and gotten a share of the bumps. She's in Delhi with CNN.
Oh.
She's a journalist.
Yeah, of course. The kind of exposure, cultural flexibility that they get is priceless. But there is a.
But it's also disruptive. It's very disruptive. It is disruptive for education. It can create a sense of rootlessness. And as they grow up into the teens, they hate to part with their kids with their friends every 3 years. So it's a significant issue.
Yeah, I know.
I just want to, for the host, you have the map, and I'll give a signal when I need it, but it'll roughly be about 3-4 minutes into my 2-3 minutes into the talk. Yeah.
No, they have only been showing it. So before you came also, they were showing it. But if you want to give him comfort, you want to show it again?
That's fine. I just want that when I give the signal, it comes up, and then after a minute or so, it should go away.
Sure.
You tell. I mean, now can you please remove it? They will do that.
Yeah, I'm up. I'm ready. Yeah.
All right. And who's the one who's ready?
This is Privil.
I'm Privil. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so very fascinating. Very fascinating. We have a girl.
It's a nomadic life.
I know. We have a girl with us called Shruti Vijayan. Her dad may not have been ambassador level, but in the foreign service. And she also kind of moved around Africa, United States. And she's now in the United States, posted from TechM, Dallas.
Right. In Dallas.
In Dallas.
Okay.
Dar es Salaam, my God. I used to handle the Middle East and Africa region for 10 years.
Oh, I got a message from Srini today.
Srini who?
In Dubai.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Dubai is a wonderful place. So, Vineet Nair, the Vineet Nair, who was a chairman, vice chairman of Tech Mahindra, had a very nice way of describing Dubai. So his description was, it is the cleanest and the most well-managed city of India.
Yeah, but it's hurting pretty badly right now.
I'm sure.
So we're ready? 7 almost?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yes.
So I guess, yeah. So you want to say something, Privil?
I'll just give it a start, Navdeep sir.
Go ahead,
Thank you
go
for
ahead, go ahead.
joining us.
Yes.
This is the 23rd episode of Prime Time at 1900. Welcome, all of you. A very warm good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. We have our amazing guest right there for you. And without further ado, let's go ahead with you, KG sir, if you want to
Yeah.
start.
Yes, so those who have joined, you may already have heard the bantering that we were doing, me and Navdeep sir. But I'll take a minute just to quickly run through his background. He's had a distinguished 36 years career in the Indian Foreign Service, and some of you who came in early must have heard where all he went. Right, the U.S., Egypt, a couple of times, Johannesburg, Dar es Salaam, which is Tanzania. And of course, he's been back to India a few times. So, distinguished career. Uh, he been awarded the Order of the Zayed by the second highest civilian award by the President of United Arab Emirates. He's a linguist, right? So he knows Arabic, he knows French, and probably he knows a few more other languages. And he's a public speaker as well, right? He's a distinguished fellow and director for the Center for New Economic Diplomacy at the Observer Research Foundation. So thank you very much, sir, for agreeing to be a speaker on the prime time at 1900. And I would like to hand this over to you for the next 45 minutes as you hold forth and tell us what is the big things that are happening in the Gulf.
Thank you, Krishna. Pleasure to speak with the tech mighties. Also slightly intimidating because I can't see most of them, but the thought that there are so many bright minds listening to this and are going to be primed up with questions is a bit daunting. Look, when I chose the topic, the Gulf in our strategic calculus, you could ask, the Gulf, is that with a capital G or a small g? Are we talking about the Persian Gulf, or are we talking about actually a Gulf in our strategic calculus? And you can take it either way. I was trying to advocate the case for a look west policy, and the reason for choosing this topic is a little strange. We diplomats are particularly prone to an ailment called localitis. It's a funny kind of disease. What it means is that when you are posted for 3 years in a country, you start kind of relating to that country and you start thinking, right or wrong, that that's the most important place on the planet. I don't know whether that happens in organizations like TechM, where your colleague in San Jose thinks that he's at the center of the digital universe, or the colleague in Singapore thinks that he's in the fastest growing region in the world economically, or the one in Dubai says that this is where the real money is. I don't know whether localitis works in your organization as well, but in diplomacy, I think it's fairly prevalent. And so, having last been ambassador in UAE, I guess I'm entitled to think that that region of the world is particularly important, even if others may or may not quite share that view. But back to the subject itself, my topic was, I guess, inspired by the very successful Look East policy that the government of India adopted in 1992. And that really led to a surge in our relationship with the ASEAN countries and with Japan, South Korea, and others. And I guess it sets you thinking that when I say a Look West policy, are they comparable? Can we replicate the depth of our ties with ASEAN, with the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council nations, or is it something entirely different? So I guess it's important to start at the beginning and maybe take a look at the map of the Gulf, if that can be pulled up.
Yeah, whoever is doing that. Is it deep or Privil?
Yes. Ready. It's ready.
Oh, okay. It's an internet. All right.
All right.
Yes.
So can you guys see the map?
Not yet. It is.
Yes.
Yes. Now, yes. Now, yes.
Okay, take a good look, and when you see with reference to India's west coast, the Gulf countries, Oman, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, really are just a couple of days sailing from the west coast. The Gulf really is our near neighborhood. It's even closer to the mainland than some of the ASEAN countries are in some sense. So it's a region with which take a good look, and Muscat, for example, is a 2-hour flight from Mumbai, and Dubai is maybe 2.5 hours or whatever. Yeah, you can take that map away if everybody's taken a good look at it. Okay. So historically, India's ties with the Gulf were on the base of the monsoon winds. So the winds would go towards the Indian west coast with the monsoon, and the Gulf traders would catch those winds and come to the Malabar coast to pick up spices and other things. And the merchants from Gujarat would similarly go to the Gulf, catching the winds the other way. And that has really defined a very long relationship that was based essentially on commerce between India and the Gulf. Later on, that relationship became very intense with Mumbai, and particularly during the first half of the 20th century. If we look at it, under the Trucial States Agreement that the Brits signed with several of these Gulf countries, they were really run out of India. And for the best part of 3/4 of a century, the one big city that people in the Gulf knew was Mumbai. This is where they came for trade. This is where they came for education. This is where they came for entertainment and for medical treatment and so on. And so we've had this exceptionally close relationship till as late as 1967, when we devalued our currency. The legal tender in most of the Gulf countries, other than Saudi Arabia, was the Indian rupee. And in the Gulf, you would still meet old timers who will call not the rial or the dirham, but they'd call it the rupee. So that's how close the relationship has been. In the earlier part of the 20th century, a lot of the pearl trade that started in places like Bahrain and Basra and Sharjah and so on, the pearl divers used to wait for the Indian merchants to come from Gujarat and from Mumbai. They would come with the money that would enable the captain of the vessel to get the supplies and set sail for the 2.5, 3 months pearl diving season. And then when at the end of the season, they would come back with the pearls. It was again an Indian merchant who would typically buy the pearls, and then they would go out to the rest of the world. In the first flush of the oil being discovered in the Gulf, once again, along with some of the Europeans, it was predominantly Indian businessmen who came in and started trading establishments and so on. And so you now have Indian communities that go back 3 generations, where the grandfather or the great-grandfather came to the Gulf, and now the rest of the families have been born there. So if that relationship was that exceptionally close, where did we go wrong, and why are we today talking about the need for this look west policy? And I think because somewhere we took our eyes off the ball. My own sense is that post our independence, our attitude towards the Gulf was defined by our sort of non-aligned ethos. We wanted to support countries that were progressive, anti-imperial, secular, and we became great friends with the regimes in Egypt, in Algeria, in Iraq. the Gulf in those days was still under the British rule. It was under British rule, except Saudi Arabia, all the way till 1971. And the other trend that sort of started during those decades was that while there was this pan-Arabism sweeping parts of the Arab world, there was also a parallel pan-Islamic movement that was taking place. And what Pakistan, as a country that was founded on the basis of religion, was quick to do was what the Pakistan was able to do was to take advantage of that religious dimension and establish really close relations with the Gulf states as they became independent, and of course with Saudi Arabia in particular. And so what you saw was that in 1971, for example, when we had our war with Pakistan, the Saudis actually put a part of their air force at the disposal of the Pakistanis. And King Faisal, who was the ruler of Saudi Arabia at that time, was richly acknowledged. The Pakistanis went to the extraordinary length of renaming Layalpur as Faisalabad. And the landscape was dotted with the King Faisal Stadium and the King Faisal Mosque, etc., etc. So that religious dimension got introduced into the relationship at a fairly early stage. While we at that time were flaunting our secular and non-aligned credentials and making good relations with the other major states. There was a second important development in 1969, which was that the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Countries, was formed. And the OIC first met for its summit in Morocco, in Rabat. And they invited a delegation from India to join that OIC movement. We accepted after much deliberation because we said we have the world's second largest or third largest Muslim population. And we suffered a humiliation because General Yahya Khan, who was the ruler of Pakistan at that time, really threw some tantrums and persuaded the hosts not to allow India inside the convention center. And so we came back very profoundly humiliated and wounded in 1969. And from then on, we kind of, at the back of our mind was also this thing that some of these countries are actually much closer to Pakistan simply because of the religious factor. This continued even as the Gulf countries started growing. 1973 was the big oil crisis after the Arab-Israeli war, and the OPEC was formed as a cartel, and the decision of OPEC to curb oil supplies meant that overnight in 1973, oil prices pretty much quadrupled. And while countries like India were hit pretty hard, it brought extraordinary wealth into the Gulf countries. And with that wealth came the massive construction projects. And with that, those construction projects came an influx of Indian workers into the Gulf in very, very large numbers. But we were still not being strategic about it, in the sense that we continued to look at the Gulf through the prism of either migrant workers or through the prism of Pakistan. Whether it was Dawood Ibrahim, who used to cavort in Dubai, or others of that ilk, again influenced our own perceptions of the Gulf. I sense that 1991 was a bit of a low point in our relationship when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and we couldn't make up our mind. Should we condemn the invasion? Should we stand by with Saddam? Should we focus on not on the geopolitics, but on getting our 185,000 workers out? Was that our immediate priority? And so what was left was that enduring image of then Foreign Minister I.K. Gujral landing in Baghdad and embracing the Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Minister of Iraq, Tariq Aziz, at a time when much of international opinion and certainly Arab opinion was riled against Saddam's actions, and in particular in the Gulf. So I think that whole policy of ambiguity, or maybe a lack of a policy, again, hurt our interests for a while, and we couldn't quite make up our mind which way we wanted to go. And so things continue to drift in that situation where we had a growing economic relationship, but at the political level, there was no real warmth. And it was almost as if we had ceded a part of our near neighborhood to Pakistan, saying, oh, this is your area of influence, which was so incorrect. And that's why I want to bring up the thing to the present juncture, where in the last few years, so much has changed. And I think while it would be absolutely reasonable to give Prime Minister Modi a large chunk of the credit for revitalizing our relationship, to be fair, it was Prime Minister Manmohan Singh who took the major step of inviting King Abdullah, then ruler of Saudi Arabia, as the chief guest on our Republic Day in 2006. And he followed it up with a visit himself in 2014. He signed a defense agreement, and that was really a major thaw in our relations with Saudi Arabia. But in 2015, when Prime Minister Modi visited Abu Dhabi, it was a milestone in many ways. And if there's one number that sort of tells you about the neglect of the region from our foreign policy perspective, think about it, that a country which is in our near neighborhood, before Prime Minister Modi, the last Prime Minister of India to visit was Mrs. Indira Gandhi in 1981. 34 years had passed before an Indian Prime Minister visited. The reception he got, it was a well-prepared visit in the background. The reception he got was quite extraordinary. The entire royal family lined up at the VIP terminal, at the presidential terminal at Abu Dhabi airport to receive him. It was followed up in quick succession by a visit by the Crown Prince in February 2016, in January 2017 as a chief guest on our Republic Day. And Prime Minister Modi himself has been back to Abu Dhabi twice since. And the reason I mention Abu Dhabi is not just localitis. It isn't just the fact that I was ambassador there at that crucial time. But it's also because in some ways, Abu Dhabi punches above its weight. There's a kind of a legend in the Gulf that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, who's the effective ruler of UAE, because the real ruler, the president, has been incapacitated by a stroke for the last 6 years, is also a bit of a mentor to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, and has been the driver behind much of the liberalization, etc., that's happening. So we did this big outreach to Abu Dhabi, and we followed it up with an outreach to Saudi Arabia. And I think in the last 3 or 4 years, Mr. Modi has visited each one of the Gulf countries other than Kuwait for various reasons. And so if you look at what changed as a result of this, this outreach, we now have comprehensive strategic partnership agreements with Saudi Arabia and with UAE. We have defense relationships. We have access to a port in Oman, in Duqm, for our naval vessels. On the political side, we abrogated Article 370. And there was an anticipation that there would be a hue and cry from the Gulf countries and indeed from the rest of the Arab world. But guess what? UAE became the first and only Muslim country to actually come out in support, saying that this is your internal matter. This happened within literally 48 hours of the decision to abrogate Article 370. And it really took out the wind out of Pakistan's sails when they were campaigning very hard with their friends to condemn India, and actually none of the other Gulf countries spoke against India's action. The only ones that did speak against India were Iran, Turkey, and Malaysia, for other reasons that we can come and dwell upon if there's an interest in that. We now routinely support each other's candidates in the UN Security Council. And if I could come back to that humiliation that we suffered in 1969 in Rabat, for me, a particularly sweet moment was March 2019, last year, when UAE's Foreign Minister Sheikh Abdullah was chairing the OIC Foreign Ministers meeting, and he invited our Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj to be the guest of honor in Abu Dhabi at an OIC Foreign Ministers meeting. The Pakistanis didn't get wind of it until a week before the conference was to take place, and they tried everything possible. Imran Khan was making the calls. Foreign Minister Qureshi was throwing tantrums. They said that we would walk out if India was invited, that they hadn't been consulted, etc., etc. And our Emirati friends held firm. And on the 1st of March 2019, when the OIC Foreign Minister session opened, our Foreign Minister was on the dais with the UAE Foreign Minister, and the Pakistani chair was vacant because they had decided to boycott the opening session as a sign of protest. But our friends had held firm despite those tantrums. So the fact that it happened almost exactly 50 years later was kind of the wheel turning a full circle, and a recognition that India was there, not just on the global stage, but back in our own neighborhood in this manner. You could also look at the defense and security side. Over the last few years, we've had joint naval exercises with UAE, for example. We have interest in co-production of weapon systems, which can be produced in India with joint investments. The countries in the Gulf today see the Arabian Sea as a shared maritime security zone where we have not only common interests, but where India is seen as a factor of stability. India is seen as a net contributor to security. And so when we had this tension last year in the Gulf of Oman and in the Persian Gulf, when you had the standoff between the Iranians and the Americans, and there was real danger to shipping, we sent 2 of our naval ships to make sure that our merchant vessels were escorted up and down the Gulf. And that was a sign of our confidence that we were there as players, as a country which has interests in the region that cannot be ignored. The other remarkable development has been in the field of intelligence sharing. And I'd alluded earlier to the fact that people like Dawood Ibrahim could create mayhem in India with the Mumbai blast and everything, and yet be safely ensconced in Dubai. That's no longer possible. Not just the fact that Dawood will not be able to go back to Dubai, but none of his cohorts can go back. People like Farooq Takla and other accomplices and aides of his have been deported out of Dubai, kicking and screaming. And if you were to ask our agencies, they'd probably tell you that our cooperation and information sharing today is on par or better with the best in the world in areas that really matter, particularly in our fight against terrorism. The other area which is significant is energy security. 60% of our hydrocarbon requirements come from the Gulf. Our economy would be unable to function if those supplies were threatened in any manner or form. And yet, companies like ONGC Videsh, OVL, which have looked at oil from Venezuela all the way to Vladivostok, could never get a foot in the door in the Gulf. And I'm going to tell you a story here because when I went there to Abu Dhabi in late 2016, soon after the Republic Day visit of the Crown Prince, I fished out the agreements, and I went across to the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company and met a very senior guy and said, listen, we have here a very strong reference to cooperation in the field of hydrocarbons, and you've got some oil blocks coming up, oil concessions coming up in the next few months. How about making sure that our political relations get translated into something substantive, and India also gets one or more oil concessions? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, you know, we'd love to do that, but it won't happen. I was intrigued. I said, why? That's a very pessimistic view. He said, I've been working with India for a long time. Your systems won't allow it. Why won't they allow it? Because we work on very tight timelines. That is the ADNOC, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. And our public sector oil companies will never be able to submit their bids in time to meet those deadlines. I called up my colleagues in Delhi in Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas and said, here's a challenge for us. Can we do this? We were supposed to pay an upfront amount of commit an upfront amount of about $650 million to get a very lucrative oil concession in a producing oil field. The catch was $650 million means it has to go to the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, and it means that it would take forever to get the approvals. So my friends came up with this interesting innovation. They said, let ONGC and BPL and HPCL break it up 3 ways, and then it is within their delegated powers as Navratnas. So we don't need to go to the Cabinet Committee. We got the minister's approval, and so for the first time, we got a bid in time, and that was nice. My Emirati interlocutor was pleasantly surprised. But when it came to the pricing, there was another issue. And he said, look, your companies expect an IRR in the low teens. And that's fine if that is what they expect, but they expect the same IRR in Angola and Nigeria as they do in the UAE or Saudi Arabia. But isn't there a difference? Firstly, we are stable, so there's no political risk. And secondly, our currency is pegged to the dollar, so there's no currency risk. So if your risk profile is different, then why is your return profile not different? Why are you expecting the same return that you would in those places? And I said, this makes sense. So we got back to our people and they convened their board meetings and changed their calculation sheets. And I was very clear. I said, look, I don't want you to make a loss. This is a commercial transaction at the end of the day, but it's also a strategic one. So can you see if the commercial and the strategic work together and we are able to get equity oil in our own backyard? And it worked out. And so we got the lower Zakum basin, we got a share in that, and it started delivering us oil with effect from 2018. The other interesting one was the strategic petroleum reserves, where we established our first joint strategic reserve with Abu Dhabi in Mangalore, and now are working on a second and a third. And the template that we have created is good enough that now the Saudis are also looking at it and others are. And that is important because, as I said, if for any reason you have disruptions in oil supply chains, then we should have enough of a strategic reserve that our industry doesn't come to a grinding halt. We also worked on the $60 billion project for India's mega refinery in Maharashtra. It was originally supposed to be in Ratnagiri, and then there was further discussions about land acquisition and so on. There was some thinking to move it somewhere else. But in that $60 billion, 30 billion would come from ADNOC in Abu Dhabi and from Aramco in Saudi Arabia. Again, giving you an idea of where we stand. Let me give you a couple of other thoughts on trade. Many of our colleagues don't know, many of our friends don't know that the GCC is our largest or second largest trading partner, depending on which definition we use, larger than EU or little smaller than EU, larger than US, larger than China. A lot of people don't know that just UAE, small little country that you saw on the map, is our third largest trading partner after US and China. Our trade last year was in excess of $60 billion. And it's not just trade. Our exports were $32 billion. So it's not just oil. And thanks to the efficiency of Jabal Ali, a lot of the exports also get transshipped to third countries, into East Africa and Central Asia and Iran and even Pakistan. So all of that goes through Dubai. Look at the investment side. Once our political relations improved, the sovereign wealth funds of these countries started looking at India. Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, which is the world's second largest sovereign fund with the assets of close to $900 billion, became the first anchor investor in India's National Infrastructure Investment Fund. And over the last few years, they've put billions of dollars into highways, into renewable energy, into logistics, into telecommunications, into ports, looking at airports, including the one in Mumbai, and of course, looking at our financial sector, into our equity markets. I mean, one estimate that I saw was that Ardia alone has invested maybe north of $15 billion in India's equity markets. There isn't a significant Indian blue chip in which they don't have some small holding. The other important element, and that's probably the last one that I will spell out in our relationship, is the Indian diaspora. And a lot of attention gets focused on the blue-collar Indian workers, and that's important because out of the 9 million or so Indians that we have in the Gulf, maybe 70% are blue-collar. And a lot of the remittances come from these blue-collar workers. Last year, out of the $80 billion of remittances that India got, which is 2% of our GDP, something like 56% came from the Gulf. $19 billion last year came in remittances from the UAE alone. When you look at the number of families that it supports and the impact that it makes on the ground at the micro level and to our balance of payment situation at the macro level, you would see that it's quite a significant factor. And then, you have the top tier of the business community in the Gulf, which is investing in India today, the NRI businessmen, into areas, again, like real estate, hospitality, tourism, healthcare, and so on. So all of that is happening. And you could say that our outreach into the Gulf has been very productive, and it is getting us all of this. And so we can take some credit for it, I think, legitimately. But remember, it takes two to tango. And while we were doing this outreach, and especially Prime Minister Modi's initiatives into the Gulf, something else was changing too. The Arabs were changing themselves. And I think not enough attention goes to that. Post 9/11, and particularly after the abbreviated Arab Spring and the changes in government in Tunisia and Egypt in 2011, there was a feeling in the Gulf countries that the rise of political Islam in the form of Muslim Brotherhood or Muslim Brotherhood related governments was the beginning of a slippery slope. And that this would mean not only the end of the monarchies in the Gulf, but it could also mean dangerous things in terms of radicalization in the region. And so UAE in particular started taking a very hard line on political Islam, almost a zero tolerance approach to any kind of fundamentalism, any kind of radicalization for any religion, but particularly for Islam. They decided to take a proactive approach on tolerance, created a very high profile post of Minister for Tolerance, declared a year of tolerance, invited the Pope and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar last year to Abu Dhabi, welcomed the construction of a major Hindu temple in a country that was so conservative initially, and really positioned themselves at the front line. They are now creating this house of Abrahamic religions where they'll have a synagogue, a church, and a mosque in the same complex. That's how far they have changed. And some of that is now rubbing off on Saudi Arabia as well, where you see that women can drive and films can be screened and concerts are being held and a futuristic city called Neom is being planned, etc., etc. This is going to have a far-reaching impact on Islam and how it is perceived. But equally important, what it meant in terms of our relationship was that suddenly Pakistan had lost its Islamic card in its foreign policy as far as the Gulf was concerned. And then now it had to talk about national interests. And when it comes to interests, the interests are far more aligned with a large, growing, stable India rather than a Pakistan that is seen as a problematic case that exports the very kind of ideologies that the Gulf states now are so opposed to. So this is now increasingly reflected in the very strong statements that we get on terrorism, etc., from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, and from Muscat. But I just put one point of caution here. We have to be watchful about some of the Islamophobic comments that emanate in our own fringe groups in India, because it bothers me that on one hand, the government from the Prime Minister down has invested heavily in our relations with these countries. And at the same time, some of these groups and the hateful sort of slogans that they spew are actually causing some damage. And so our Ministry of External Affairs and diplomats on the ground really have to then work extra hard to do damage control rather than continue to develop a positive agenda. And it also, of course, opens a window for Pakistan to exploit in terms of our relations with these countries. So to conclude, let me say that I started by saying, is there a gulf in India's strategic calculus? I think there was, but in the last 6 or 7 years, we've done a lot to bridge that gulf. Do we need a look west policy? I believe we do, and one is firmly in evolution, and it needs to be strengthened across multiple sectors. Will it be the same as our look east policy? I don't think so, because the GCC itself is a house divided. Qatar doesn't talk to Saudi Arabia and UAE, and there's still that friction underway. We thought we would have the kind of relationship with GCC that we have with ASEAN, but it can't happen because they are not a cohesive body. Because ASEAN over the years has really created that strong institutional framework with their annual summits of the ASEAN Regional Forum of the East Asia. They have ministerial dialogues and sectoral dialogues and all of those little things that give sort of substance to the relationship. But we've made a really good beginning with the visits. And remember, one thing that is underestimated is personal direct relationships at the top. These are monarchies. The families in power tend to stay for a long time and have long memories. And so it's still a fairly personal level of relationship. And that's something that we've seen happen quite effectively with India. I'd see this progressively turning into more strategic dimensions, including potentially defense. But certainly, if we play it right, we could see a lot of investment coming in from the Gulf and some genuinely productive tie-ups, including for our diaspora. I'll leave it at that and leave the floor open for questions. Thank you.
Super duper. And so your friend Srini has asked a couple of questions, so he's there, he's listening in. Yeah, I don't think
Let me just take a minute to switch off the fan. It's making a lot of noise. Just
please do so.
Yes, please.
So Srini, first of all, he's giving you a compliment. He says, Your Excellency, Mr. Suri, thanks for the wonderful session, insightful history of the Gulf. You played a significant role in strengthening ties between UAE and India. He follows that with a question that says that with COVID, low prices of oil and the recent shift of export 2020 to next year, how do you see UAE coping up with economy which is completely dependent on the real estate, retail, hospitality? And I'll kind of add my own flavor to that. I say that Dubai is one very large Hiranandani estate.
Look, there's no question that the not just UAE but the entire Gulf is facing a double whammy. of COVID and low oil prices. And it's going to be tough for at least a year or more. Dubai was, in any case, showing signs of slowdown, and they were pinning a lot of hope on the Dubai Expo 2020, and so its postponement by a year has come as a painful blow. I'm concerned that the slowdown that you are witnessing is not only going to lead to a substantial exodus of Indian workers, but it's also going to have a cascading effect on Indian businesses in the Gulf, particularly on the MSME sector. Lot of the smaller companies are run by Indians, owned by our very entrepreneurial people, and they are going to take a pretty painful blow. Having said that, these are rich countries. They have vast surpluses. I wouldn't be surprised if Abu Dhabi again bails out Dubai, as they did after the Lehman Brothers crisis, with a $20 billion or thereabouts. So I'd expect that they would come out. It's just that I feel that what it's going to do is accelerate some of the structural changes that were taking place in any case. Not just the attempts to diversify into non-oil sectors of the economy, but also to have a much greater emphasis on localization of the workforce. You've seen the legislation that is being drafted in Kuwait, the Omanization programs, the Saudiization programs, the Emiratization programs, and so on. So I think what it's going to do is shift the kind of workers that will come from India. And this is important for us. And I've been not only talking about it, but trying to sensitize key parts of government as well. That look, you can see it coming down the pike, that it is not going to be business as usual in certain segments of the economy. And we need to be prepared for that if we are to retain our position as the preferred and overwhelmingly the largest expatriate community in the Gulf.
All right. Another follow-up question he has is, do you think UAE and Qatar will reconcile, given the fact that, given the fact that Expo 2021 and FIFA 2022 rather is coming through?
Never say never, but it's become personal, and because it's become personal, it's become more complicated. The Americans have tried very hard behind the scenes. They've had meetings. They are the only ones with genuine clout across all the countries. They have exceptionally close relations with the Emiratis. They have bases in Qatar and Bahrain. But even with all of that clout and their determination that the GCC should stand united in their campaign against Iran, they haven't been able to make sufficient headway. So while we would all be happier if there was a reconciliation, a lot is going to depend on the positions that the leadership in the two countries takes. And I think mistakes have been made on both sides. The UAE perhaps made the mistake of identifying or specifying a set of conditions or preconditions for rapprochement. And those conditions are really hard to meet because they also include shutting down Al Jazeera.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so there are other questions that came in during the time of the registration. So I think people, the one set of questions is around the fact that it is not just ME, it is MEA, right? Middle East and Africa. So what is our view on kind of balancing some of the Middle East kind of thing with relationships with Africa?
I think I'm trying to get my head around this question. There is MEA. It's MENA actually is what is frequently called Middle East.
North Africa. North Africa. Yeah.
So there's Middle East and North Africa, and then there's Sub-Saharan Africa. In the way we look at this from our Ministry of External Affairs is, we have a department that deals with the Gulf, and that includes Iraq. We have a department that deals with what we call West Asia and North Africa, which is sort of Syria and Jordan and Israel and Palestine, all the way from Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Algeria, Morocco. So all of that Arab belt and Sudan comes under the WANA division department, as we call it. And then we further divide the Sub-Saharan Africa into two. We have very close relations with the WANA region. I think one of our real successes has been the relationship with Israel and pulling it out of the closet. The fact that Prime Minister Modi became the first Indian Prime Minister to actually visit Israel and balance it with a visit to Ramallah and to send the signal that, it's not that we've dumped our support for the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. So we've done that. We have very good ties with Egypt, where I served as ambassador. But in diplomatic parlance, when you talk about how important is a posting for us or how important is a relationship for us, there are objective criteria to look at it. Egypt might be a country of 100 million and the UAE might be a country of 9.5 million. But our trade with UAE is 15 times perhaps our trade with Egypt. The capacity of UAE sovereign funds like RDI and Mubadala to invest in India is far larger. The fact that we have 3.4 million Indians in UAE as compared to about 10,000 in Egypt, again gives a dimension to our relationship. So the reason why I wanted to talk about the Gulf was that, yes, those are large countries, Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, but all of our economic relationship with them put together is dwarfed by our economic relationship with UAE.
With UAE, wow.
And that's sometimes a factor that is not sufficiently appreciated.
Wow. No, at your circles in diplomacy, when you brought this up that we went to Israel, the Prime Minister went to Israel, but that's always a bit of a tightrope walk, isn't it? Because I know for a fact that when I was in the Middle East and I had to travel to Palestine, for example, I had to take a Israeli passport, and the Indian ambassador there, or rather Indian consulate there, issued me a separate 1-year valid passport in which to stamp and all that. So, and you always knew that if you came back with a stamp of Israel and went to Saudi Arabia, you won't be let inside. All those issues were there. So given all this on the ground, how do you do this tightrope walk?
Who said diplomacy is easy? But look, at least we found a way to help you out of your predicament, right? So these are arrangements that have been worked out. Look, one of the I think hallmarks of our diplomacy, and I know that some people want us to take aggressive positions, and I've heard people say, "Hey, you guys are always fence sitters, and you don't choose between this and that." We don't need to. We are only in one business, which is promoting India's strategic interests, and if we can do those by talking to the Iranians and talking to the Gulf, by talking to the Russians and talking to the Americans, by talking to the Israelis and talking to the Palestinians or the other Arabs, then we are serving our country well, because we should not be in an either or position unless we really have our backs to the wall. Yes, we've been in that situation with Iran because of the Trump sanctions, but otherwise, the art of diplomacy is that we should have the largest amount of strategic space available to take decisions that are in favor of India's interests, and not get swept away either by ideological considerations or by conflicts between other states. So I think it's served us well, and it's something that we continue to do with reasonable amount of dexterity.
No, that's a very powerful answer. And I kind of marry this with the other thing that you said about at the top, it's all about relationships, and these people are monarchies and so on. So that's one set. But here, when you run this diplomacy at IAS and IFS level people, it's also about dexterity of the individual, isn't it? So, and you people are anyway moving around every 3 years. How do you ensure this continuity?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Globally in diplomacy, there are two schools of thoughts. There's the Russian approach, for example, which is extreme specialization in a particular language or a particular region. So if you have a Russian diplomat who's an Arabist, then the chances are that all of her or his career is going to be devoted to the Arab world and with assignments back and forth. There are other countries that don't do any specialization at all. They don't do languages at all like we do. In the Indian Foreign Service, when you join the service, you are assigned a language, and I chose Arabic, and you remain in probation until you clear an exam that shows an ability to read, write, and speak, and write to the level of writing an essay in that language.
Wow.
You're required to demonstrate that ability. Until then, you remain sort of third secretary language trainee on probation. So what we do is partial specialization, but we've taken the view that between the two poles of extreme specialization and no specialization that other countries follow, our approach is that by the time you reach the level of an ambassador or a joint secretary in Delhi, you should have actually had exposure to more than one culture, more than one region. And so when policy is made, you have perhaps a slightly more rounded view of the world than somebody who has spent all her life in one area and becomes a very narrow specialist to that extent.
Okay, very interesting. Very, very interesting. There is this angle, since you've been, well, the topic is Gulf, we've been across to Africa also. Then there's this angle of China, right, which kind of uses its economic might to almost buy out some of these countries. Do you think there is a Chinese, sort of creep in somewhere in the Gulf area?
They are certainly expanding in the Gulf. Up till now, the relationship is quite transactional. They've made overtures. They've invested in some areas. But I think the new deal that they are doing with Iran is going to put a bit of a dampener on their relations with some of the Gulf countries. But on your point about China and Africa, I'd actually done a paper when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was in power, and I was head of the Africa desk in Delhi, where I'd kind of drawn a conclusion, and I'm talking about back in 2006, and I think some of that conclusion still holds valid to an extent, that it is neither possible nor desirable for India to emulate China in Africa. We should play to our strengths, not to theirs. And the reason for saying this was twofold. One was that we simply don't have the resources that China is putting into Africa. We don't have the state-led systems that they use for their political and economic penetration. But also that they are making some serious mistakes in Africa that usually don't get reported enough. In Zambia, which is a country that they've been invested in for quite a long time, about 2 weeks back, there was an attack on Chinese nationals, and 3 Chinese nationals were killed because of the deep-seated grievances that ordinary Zambians have against the manner in which Chinese have invested and acted in the country. About 10 years back, 12 years back, Michael Sata who was an opposition leader, ran his election campaign on an entirely Chinese platform, going to the extent of saying that if elected to power, I will throw the Chinese out, I will break diplomatic relations, and I will establish relations with Taiwan. He lost narrowly.
Wow.
And then in the next elections, he won, but on a slightly more moderated platform, but still enough to send the signals. So I guess what I want to say is I could go to Tanzania, which has recently canceled a $10 billion port contract with the Chinese. And the president has gone on record to say, my predecessor must have been drunk when he signed this, this contract. You hear horror stories coming out of Angola about the manner in which the country has been taken for a ride. So I think with the democratization taking place in Africa, with the rise of a strong middle class and so on, you will probably see much greater pushback against the very neo-imperial sort of neo-mercantilist methods that China has been following in Africa. I'm not a great fan of what China has done. It sounds good at one level, but there's a strong pushback that you see in a number of countries taking place.
Wow, very heartening. As a company, we are 50% of our business almost is telecommunications. And having spent quite some time in the Middle East, I know the preponderance and the success of Huawei in that region in the telecom networks. And so, other places like Singapore, for example, has cancelled it. Europe has said no, and America has always said no. India probably will dither, and I don't know where it'll go. Maybe they won't do the 5G. But how do you see the Middle Eastern Gulf countries dealing with Huawei going forward?
Look, the Chinese pushed very hard for Huawei. And I actually had substantive discussions on this with my friends in Dubai and elsewhere. They were being very pragmatic about it, that they had a Dubai Expo 2020. They had already announced that this would be the first place where 5G was being operationalized and rolled out. Huawei was probably the only game in town if you wanted to meet that ambitious deadline of roughly now to roll it out. And it was much cheaper. They were fully mindful of the security implications, but they also kind of thought that, look, whichever company comes in is going to use a backdoor, is going to exploit weaknesses. And so their way of discussing it was that you need to strengthen your own protections against data theft rather than keep out. They were following this argument that has also been heard in the UK in the last few days of the core versus the periphery. That, let them take the periphery, but keep them out of the core of the 5G network. But the Australians took a very different approach. The Australians looked at it in great detail and said there's actually no difference. What is the periphery today will become the core tomorrow. And so they took the decision to keep them out completely. Not Huawei, but also ZTE.
ZTE, okay. Wow, amazing. We just have a couple of more minutes, so let me see what question to pick up. So why did Iran remove India? This is Umesh's question. Remove India from the Chabar project, as per the news that we hear recently.
I've seen the reports. I wouldn't just go by the headlines that we've seen. I think there's a lot more going on. There is a fact that the railway line, which will take the cargo from Chabahar, not just into Afghanistan, but further up into Central Asia, is an important part of our connectivity projects. The report that you talk about has come in the light of some of the press reports about this mega deal between Iran and China, where China itself is going to establish a new port about 80 kilometers west of Chabahar. And they have offered that, hey, if the Indians haven't been able to do this railway line, we'll do it for free, or we'll do it on much softer terms. But I must qualify that all of this is in the realm of speculation, because even the agreement between Iran and China hasn't been signed, and whatever we are speculating is on the basis of media reports that have come out about that agreement, and then what implications it might have for the Chabahar port and rail connectivity for India. So I'd say it's early days yet, but be mindful that India will push for it.
Okay. And I think the last question would be, given, I mean, he's not asked this, but I'm saying that given the fact that there's going to be a slowdown, people are going to come back, etc., but still we need to look at the long term. What would be the areas of cooperation with GCC for India? Healthcare, pharma. Will there be a free trade agreement with the UAE, for example?
FTAs are really complicated. And what you don't want is that an FTA becomes a backdoor for entry of Chinese products. That somebody can establish a factory in Jebel Ali Free Zone and then use that to push stuff to you duty free. And we've been down that road before, and that's why we are a little bit careful about FTAs. But one area that I've flagged also on the workers' side, and I want to just take a half a minute on this, is that when I was in Abu Dhabi, we started this pilot project on skill mapping and harmonization of skills. And what it meant was that if 70% of Indian workers are in the blue collar, and many of them come in at the entry level of the workforce in those countries as construction laborers or automotive or whatever. So now countries like UAE are defining the job requirements for a welder or for an electrician or a plumber, or etc. They expect the person to have some certified skills in those areas. And so what we have done is National Skills Development Corporation has run a program to align some of its training programs with the vocational requirements in 18 designated areas in the construction and automotive sectors. And the certification from India, from NSDC, it has been approved by and accredited by the UAE authorities, so that Indian workers going with those certificates from those skills development institutes are able to get better paying jobs as skilled workers rather than unskilled. And UAE from its side is incentivizing companies to hire skilled workers with those certificates. And that pilot was so successful that now Saudis have copied it. And, the first pilot with Saudi Arabia would have happened already, but for COVID having come in the way. So I think the way for us to go is move up the value chain and position ourselves as the preferred country for workers at different levels.
Fantastic.
I mean, that's one dimension. Yeah, that's just one dimension, but I'm sure we could discuss this in greater detail if time permitted.
Yeah. I think I just want to slip in one last. I know the Indian government always helps out our people in shipping them back, etc., Iraq, and so many examples, right? But at the same time, we also hear, I mean, I just couldn't resist this question since I've been in the Middle East. We also hear about the workers' colonies like Sonapur and, all of that. So, how is the government sensitive to that and, reacting and trying to do anything about it?
So I visited a number of labor camps myself. And one of the topics of discussion is the imperative to improve living conditions for workers. And, in the last 5 or 6 years, you see progress, partly because, it started with Qatar, that because of FIFA World Cup, it's shown a spotlight on the human rights conditions of workers who are building these grand stadia and so on. Qatar realized that it would suffer serious reputational damage if it was to face accusations of ill treatment of workers. And now other countries have also started realizing that of their own volition. And so you do see a trend towards better facilities, of mandatory standards, of labor courts that are willing to step in and address issues of abuse and so on. Take the case of domestic workers, for example, and chauffeurs and chefs and cooks and so on. These were the most exploited class because they were seen as personal staff and they were outside the remit of the Ministry of Labor. But now they've been moved to labor and outside the interior ministry so that the people can get better protection. We are working on a very ambitious e-migrate system where our workers go through an e-migrate that has a handshake with the counterpart on the other side. In fact, one of your competitors is doing that project for us in UAE to have that handshake with the UAE labor portal, so that you have better enforcement of contracts that are signed by the workers, and not the kind of rampant contract substitution and abuse that somebody's been promised 2,000 dirhams, but wahan jaake 1,000 milega, to kya karega? You know, where's his redress, where's his recourse, except the embassy to take up his causes and so on. So a lot of work is going on. It is still work under progress. There's a lot to be done, but I would just take encouragement that things today are far better than they were a few years back. And if there's one person that we should thank for these way our embassies and consulates today are sensitive to this, I think that is late Mrs. Sushma Swaraj, because she really brought it to the forefront of our agenda. And it no longer became an issue that Mr. Suri is compassionate, so he is going to look after the workers, but Mr. X is not, and he can do whatever he likes. It became part of our diplomatic agenda that we would make sure that our workers are given the best possible treatment. So the Indian Community Welfare Fund and all of those other innovations that we created.
Super duper. I think we're at the top of the hour, and I hope Srini, if you are still on the call, you heard Mr. Suri say that, you know, there's a competitor is doing the project for the government. And so thank you, sir. Thank you for being a special guest on this show, and making you know, all of us so much enlightened about the Gulf, about Africa, about diplomacy in general, foreign policy. And thank you, audience, for making Prime Time at 9 what the show is. We are on the 89th episode, I think. So thank you very much. So wherever you are in the world, good night, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Bye-bye, sir.
Good day.
Good day. Good day.